Hello, 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 and welcome to Getting Rooted, the show that's all about the journey of being rooted, reclaiming one's own truth, and embracing destiny. I'm Janine Hansel Frimpong, your host, and I'm a licensed clinical professional counselor and trauma specialist in the state of Maryland. I'm also the founder and clinical director of Rooted Holistic Therapeutic Services. The content of this podcast is not counseling advice nor a substitute for individual therapy. The content is for information purposes only, and the information provided is not intended to be used as a replacement for medical and mental health advice. Please seek and follow the advice of your licensed mental health professional. In this podcast episode, we will be exploring the practice of self compassion and discussing its role in overcoming self criticism and embracing imperfections and building resilience. I have a guest with me today, Siobhan Swain, who is a licensed clinical social worker that is licensed in Texas and Minnesota, that will be joining us in this discussion of cultivating self compassion and nourishing the soul. Hi, Siobhan. How are you today?
Hi, I am doing good. How are you?
I'm well. I'm well. All right. So in discussing this, before we jump into self compassion, because I'm really excited about talking about it. Tell my listeners who you are, a little bit about your practice, and who's your target audience.
I'm Siobhan, as you stated, licensed clinical social worker. I am the founder of the Healing Lounge, and so that's a private practice. I am based out of Texas and serve women in both Texas and Minnesota. And so my areas of focus are I do quite a bit of trauma work. I do a lot of grief work. I also do some work around perinatal and postpartum depression, anxiety. And then a bigger theme that I feel like I've realized over the past year, regardless of what the person is coming to see me for, a big commonality is disconnection from emotions, a lot of disconnection from one's body, a lot of overachievement tendencies that are usually directly tied to childhood experiences and trauma.
Yes, I can agree with that. I think I see a lot of that also in my practice. In a lot of times, mine is with both men and female. The men do actually get into therapy, but I think
Mm-hmm.
there's definitely a theme, and I think there's definitely when we look at age groups, right? When we look at the millennials
Mm-hmm.
um, versus was it Gen X, Gen Z's, I think the millennials definitely higher. In my experience, have been higher this drive to like have perfection and get things done, and
Yes.
just drive, push, 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 and this lack of self compassion. Me being a millennial myself, recognize the pattern. And I was like, when I started seeing that in my clinical work with clients, I said, wow, there's something here, right? There's definitely a generational overarching theme that I'm recognizing. I wonder, in your work, do you see that in a specific demographic or a specific age group? Do you see that more so than others?
Yeah, I would say that, I mean, across the board, I see it with the population that I work with. Now, I do only work with adults and I only work with women. Now, age range would be probably like, I don't know, 19 to 50 something, right? And I think elements of it exist within everyone. And I think the self compassion is sometimes just a hard thing for people to kind of adopt as a practice.
So when we talk about self-compassion, when we identify this concept of self-compassion, what is that, and how do we kind of incorporate that in our day-to-day lives?
Yeah, it's interesting. When you sent me the questions and you were like, well, how do you define it? I was like, how do I define self-compassion?
Mhm.
Because it's one of those terms that I feel like I use a lot and I can see it, I can feel it. And so I was really thinking about it, and I feel like self-compassion is often the way that we respond to ourselves, right? It is really, it looks like an act. It looks like I made a mistake. How am I responding to myself in that moment? How am I talking to myself in that moment? Which makes it a little bit different. And then the word compassion is really about an awareness to others' distress, right? And awareness and an acknowledgement and almost this desire to want to be of assistance in that moment. And so when I think about it with myself, if I'm talking to someone about their relationship with self, it is, are you able to have that awareness for yourself? Are you
Mm.
able to acknowledge that you're even in distress? Because a byproduct of many folks who experience traumatic experiences that they kind of cut off those emotions, right? They keep it pushing, they keep it moving. So there is no acknowledgement of this. And so that is kind of what I would say is self compassion. It's really that awareness, that acknowledgement, and how we respond to ourselves.
Yeah, I like that because I think there's definitely a difficulty, and we can sometimes be compassionate with other people because we can see them and we can see the
Mm-hmm.
stress they're going through. But when it comes to ourselves, we are really hard on ourselves. And I'm wondering, why do we
Mm-hmm.
think that we become these people that are beating ourselves up? Why are we so critical of the things that we do right or do wrong or don't do at all, right? Like, why do you
Mm-hmm.
think we are our biggest critic? Was it critic?
Yeah. So I would say some of the things that I really have thought about, again, I'm really thinking about the folks who I work with.
Mhm.
And if I am someone who grew up in an environment where um, I had to, in a way, disconnect myself from emotions. And I'm thinking about people who have more like avoidant type behaviors, right? That's
Yeah.
another theme with the folks I work with. It's a lot of, like you said, achieving and striving. And you kind of learn to get your good feels from accomplishments. And so when we think about, okay, why is self-compassion so hard, I think about what are some of the things. Well, those core beliefs for the folks who I work with are often things like, I'm not really good enough, right? I'm not really capable.
Mhm.
um I don't really deserve good things. And so those core beliefs often reside in a person's subconscious. I don't think that people are often aware, which is why I hear so many people saying, well, I know this intellectually, right? But, and the thing is, knowing something intellectually is not necessarily enough to get to the deep change that people want when we're operating from our subconscious so often. So I think self compassion is hard because it's in direct conflict, right? If I grew up in a home where there was a lot of emotional abuse and I've spent X number of years hearing that I'm not smart or I'm not this or I'm not that, trying to on the fly, right, say, oh, let me just offer some kindness to myself, it's counterintuitive.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's definitely, I think, I deal with attachments. I deal with like, that childhood
Hmm.
component of how when I did something wrong in my home, or if or what is the expectation of my family of me getting things right, right? And so I have to get it right because if I don't, then I'm disappointing other people. And if I'm disappointing other people, then what does that say about me, right? And it creates this
Yes.
narrative that you continue to write and write and write until you become an adult when you get to choose and you're the one that is really judging whether you get things right or wrong, but really
Hmm.
can't disconnect from that pattern of always thinking about what if, right? And the work that I do, my clients laugh at me because I challenge, like, and they say things, and I say, really, that's interesting. Like, so who's making up these rules that you're living by?
Yes, right? Mhm.
I guess I am. Okay, okay. So help me understand why you made that rule. Like, how's that working for you? How's it serving you? And they're like, I
Exactly.
guess not serving. Right, but
Mhm.
we stick with what we know because it's comfortable, and so if
Mhm.
I have to give myself self-compassion, then I have to acknowledge that I did something that maybe I'm not proud of or that is challenging for me, and then I have to take a step back and say, "Okay, it didn't work out. Let me get back up and try again," right? And really
Yes.
having that process of, as you said earlier, awareness that, yeah, this is not happening right the way I want it to happen. We were
Mhm.
talking about my move, and I'm like, I have to be self-compassionate myself because I feel like beating myself. I'm like, I should have seen all these things happening, but how could I? Like, I'm not a
Right.
fortune teller. So
Exactly.
I think it's important to practice that because practicing that get really when I did that, I was like, "Huh, okay, I can breathe." Like I don't have to be like
Yes.
anxious or
Mhm.
s and so you wanna kinda talk about, like, how does that connect with healing? How does self-compassion help us in our process of healing, especially in trauma and, childhood
Mhm.
trauma, inner child work that we all need to do?
Right.
How does those 2 coincide with each other? But
Yeah,
yeah.
mhm. I feel like they're really connected. I feel like I really don't know how a person's going to get to the level of healing that they want by beating themselves up, right? Like, it's one of those, how is that going to work for you? Right. And so I would say that one thing that I feel like happens a lot is as adults, we often are able to look at our traumatic experiences with a different lens that we just didn't have access to in childhood. And I think that a part of even being able to do that breeds some self compassion, right? You think about most of us would, we say things to ourselves that we would never say to like a child, that we would never say to another person. And it's really getting a person to a place to where they kind of have this awareness of their experience and understanding as to how I got here. Because I may have had a mistake, I may have missed some red flags, I may have done all of these things that I could easily beat myself up over. But if I can understand how I got here, I can have both accountability, right? Like, yes, I need to do better, and compassion in that I was working with what I knew. And
Right.
I think that that is really helpful because, again, with the folks who I work with, a lot of times on paper they've done all the things, right? But can you take a moment to sit in a win? No, because you're moving on to the next one. And so it's kind of about just like acknowledging and accepting one's full humanity. And if I can do that and I can offer myself some grace and some kindness as I go through this healing journey, which is not going to be linear, we're not going to just be going up, right? Like we're going to go up, we're going to go back, we're going to go around, we're going to spin a block a couple of times. How are you going to be able to go through all of that without compassion? Because if you don't have it, it'll end up actually having the opposite impact where you're just feeling down in the dumps. You're just feeling bad about yourself. You're feeling hopelessness. You're feeling as if things will never get better. And so I feel like the two have to coincide because it's not a linear journey. And in order to go through all the ebbs and flows, we have to be able to be compassionate and respond to ourselves with some grace.
Yes, yes. I love the part that is not linear, right? This process is not a
Right.
straight line, and the whoop de woo, the the roller coaster of the process.
Exactly.
It's a challenge, it's a
Hmm.
challenge, and a lot of times, I tell clients that in the beginning of the process, and then when they're going through the process, they're like, "Oh my god, like, I had a great couple of weeks, and then this hit me, and now I'm being triggered and blah, blah." I'm like, "Here, welcome to the roller coaster," right? Like, it's not
Exactly. Yes.
no, I said, "Therapy has made things worse." I said, "Has it made things worse, or has it enlightened some things that you were trying to suppress for so long that was coming out in
Yes.
other symptomologies or other ways that wasn't serving you?" And so now
Hmm.
it's at the surface, and you gotta deal with it. You can't keep pushing it
Right.
down because that's no longer available to you. So I find it very interesting, right? So that self-compassion is required because it's going to be one of the holding blocks of, right, I can soothe myself. I can be like, you know what? It's not my fault. And I have to figure out a way to navigate this and deal with it. And I
Yes.
think it's empowering and it's powerful when you're
Right.
able to give yourself a pat on the shoulder. It's okay.
Hmm. And it's necessary, right? And it's also, I feel like you kind of mentioned inner child work. A lot of times, that's what we didn't get. For a lot of folks, they didn't get it. And so self compassion is hard because it's new, it's foreign to them. And so you're having to build this muscle from scratch. And healing is messy. I wish it was really cute. I wish it was like, all flowers and daisies, but a lot of things come up. And we have to be able to allow ourselves to go through the process without adding to. That's something I will say to my clients all the time. Now, what we're not going to do is add on top of everything we're dealing with, you beating yourself up because you made a mistake,
Mhm.
right? So, can you allow yourself to be human through the process?
Absolutely, and you're absolutely right. I think a lot of times when we go back to childhood, how you were raised and what was allowed, right? In my generation, they, stop crying, I'll give you something to cry for, right? So I wasn't allowed
Mm-hmm.
to process what I was feeling. I had to learn how to suck it up, suck it down, and push it away, right? For me to
Mm-hmm.
move on with my life. So really, you have a person in therapy or you have a person sitting in front of you and you're like, all right, feel your feels.
Right. They have no idea. And it's terrifying and overwhelming, right? Yeah.
So, and I think recognizing, and I really coach my clients in session like, okay, I know this is uncomfortable. This is but what does it feel like? What would it feel like if you were able to just tell yourself it's okay? And that
Mm-hmm.
in itself, it's like it's not okay. And they start rambling and give me all the reasons why it's not okay. And it's like, but it is okay. And it will
Exactly.
be okay.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know when, but it will be okay. We got to work through that process, right?
Yes.
So that immediate relief or immediate, the need to be immediately feeling better is something that, their body is trained, right? The body keeps a score. So if it's not used to coping with big emotions, it's used to suppressing it, our job as stirring things up
Mm-hmm.
creates a chaotic environment internally that they, need a lot of help navigating and adjusting to.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so with your work and the women that you work with, um, how do you build resilience for them as they're navigating this space of experiencing the emotions that they're going through?
Yeah, I do quite a bit of, so sometimes people have a struggle accessing their emotions, right? If you have been really disconnected, people often don't even have the language to say what they're feeling, right? They know they're upset. They know they felt anxious, but what does that mean? What is that communicating? What does that feel like in your body? And so, what I found is some people are able to access these things a lot better if we focus on their body, right? So, this happened. Where did you feel that distress? Then a person can often, say, well, my chest was really tight, or I felt it in my stomach. Okay, so is there an emotion or something tied to that? Is there a memory tied to that? And to really kind of go through it, one, overachievers like to move fast, right? So quite often, someone is like, okay, I know this, so what do I do? And I'm like, we're not there yet. You can't even name what this is yet. And so I think that there is this idea where sometimes this work becomes another achievement. So I think that slowing down, what does it feel like, kind of unpacking things at a little bit of a slower pace. And also asking folks, okay, well, what would you have needed to have heard in this moment when you were younger? And having people really use some of that, um, because they can kind of understand that I felt this and I was okay. I said something kind to myself and I was okay.
Mhm.
And those little deposits kind of help a person build up some of that resilience for the remainder of their healing journey.
Yeah, I feel like we're meeting the same kind of people.
Yeah.
Yes, the language is a big part, right? I and it is amazing once they get the language, it's kind of like, "Oh, I can name what I'm feeling," right? So I'm just feeling this
Mhm.
heaviness, and I think that's empowering in itself. And a lot of times say if you don't learn anything else in therapy, if you don't decide to finish your healing journey because it's just overwhelming, if you can name your emotions, you're halfway there because a lot of times
Right.
we don't know what we're feeling. We just know we're feeling something, right? And it creates these
Mhm.
big roller coaster of explosions within us, and we're like, right? Because we weren't, like I said earlier, we weren't able to feel, we weren't able, to navigate that. And I say we, meaning, the generation that I
Right.
grew up in, or my clients, like recognizing that it is a monumental shift for a lot of people to be able to identify their emotions. And with
Mhm.
you, I use dialectical behavior therapy, which is a big piece of this naming your emotion, because that's how you can regulate it. If you know what it is, then we can figure
Mhm.
out how to regulate it, right? If you're feeling sad and
Yes.
depressed, okay, there's some things we can do about that. But if you're just feeling blah, I don't know what blah is.
Mhm.
That, or if I'm feeling just uneasy, okay, let's navigate that a little bit and let's name that. And
Mhm.
so I think recognizing that, and so that's what resilience is important. That is important for resilience, because you can go back and say, okay, I've felt this before and I know what to do. I can, rather than, like
Mhm.
you said, jump over it and jump to the next thing and be this place of overachieving, or navigating. I think with some work that I've done, even in coach with a coach, a life coach, that was a big thing, like overachieving. She's like, Janine, if you don't sit down somewhere, yeah,
Mhm. Right?
do the next thing. I gotta do the next thing. And she's like, why? And I'm like, because isn't that what you're supposed to do? The next thing. If this thing is done, I go on to the next
Yeah.
thing. And she's like, no, your neurons are like overfiring because you're just so used to
Right.
do. And I had to sit with that for a moment. And I had to be like, and this is where that self-compassion, I talked about earlier, like, all right, it didn't work out the way you wanted to work out. Okay, now what?
Yeah. Mhm.
I got to sit with that.
Yeah.
And I got to decide, either I beat myself up or I take it with stride and revamp and regroup
Mhm.
and give myself a moment to be disappointed with that, but move on. I think in years past, Janine was like, "Oh my god," and trying to like try to over accomplish the next thing and try to just jump over and not sit with what I was feeling. And so not knowing it, I think it's really important that, I'm excited because it's reminding me of that important work that needs to be done. That a lot of
Yeah.
times we miss, especially with trauma clients, that piece of just sitting with that emotion, sitting with that
Mhm.
feeling, knowing what you're feeling, and being that safe place for them to be able to own what they're feeling. Um, so yeah, it's just a lot of things going on in my brain that I'm like, yeah,
No, it's all right because it's so interconnected.
yeah, absolutely. And owning what you're feeling in your body is a big piece of identifying the next step, right? It's that missing piece that a lot of people are missing, the missing part that a lot of people are missing, so that they can get to that next step of the messy
Mhm.
healing, right? It's I call it the pre-op. Before we can even
Mm.
operate, we got to name what is going on. We got to figure out what is this. What is this? We know the symptom because you're coming in
Mhm.
because things are not working, but we got to figure out what is the root cause. What's causing
Mhm.
you feel whatever the symptoms are. And so a lot of clients, like you said, come in, want to jump into it. And I said, oh, I'm not going to operate yet. And make sure
Mhm.
that you're ready for the operation and the recovery that comes after that. So there's a lot of prep work that we have to do. And a lot of clients, because they've been in this misery, they've been in this pain, they've been in this place, have a
Mhm.
hard time sitting and doing that pre-op work. That's
Yeah.
necessary. Yeah, absolutely. And so for you and your clients and the work that you do, how do you begin, like once they've gone through that process of naming their emotion, what is the next part that you take your clients through in this journey of self-compassion?
Yeah, I would say I kind of alluded to a little bit in terms of in session, see if people are able to offer some compassion to themselves, right? So this can look a variety of ways. So, like, let's say somebody shows up and there tends to be this idea that either I am doing well and nothing happens, or I am failing terribly, right? So sometimes folks will, again, it's not linear. So things have been going good, something happens, and they're like, oh no, right? Sometimes people are like, I think I relapsed. And I'm like, on what? Like, what are you talking about? And so part of it is realizing that the goal isn't to not ever have an emotional response, right?
Right.
Like, apathy is not the goal. We're not trying to erase our emotions. We are trying to allow ourselves to experience the ebbs and flows in a way that feels tolerable for us. So we're
Yeah.
often trying to increase our window of tolerance. We're trying to do those things. And so in those moments when someone feels like they've quote unquote messed up, right? I think that's a great opportunity to, for one, me to model the compassion by offering compassion to them. And one example that stands out is someone was like, oh my gosh, I messed up. And I was like, I feel like you learned a lot from this. Like maybe you can just reward yourself in some way for being able to recognize that I responded in a way that is not desirable for me and to make this decision to work to respond differently. And it's often like people are really shocked. They're like, well, but I messed up. And it's like, this is a part of the process, right? So that just normalizing it, really letting people know this is a part of it. This isn't like the end all be all that there was a mistake. And to really acknowledge their humanity and that we're not going to ever operate in a way where we're just like super chill all the time, right? Like we live on earth, there's a lot happening, there's a lot going on. We're going to have feelings, we're going to feel a range of emotions, and you can feel those things, and that is okay. And so it's really leaning into that. How can you accept yourself in these moments? That kind of starts to come up like throughout the process, but definitely whenever someone feels like they've messed up.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, and I love that because I think recognizing that normalizing that piece of messing up is important. Um, because it empowers them to go back and say, okay, I can do this. Like messing up doesn't
Mm-hmm.
mean it's the end all be all. Like that Michael Jordan, I can never remember it when I need to remember it, but it's a Michael Jordan quote where like so many shots, was it 1,000 shots? If you're
I
listening,
think
you
I
know
know
what
what you're
I'm.
talking about. Yes.
Yeah, like, if you don't miss a shot, you won't know. You can keep failing, but you won't know until you make that shot, and you gotta keep trying, and I think
Yeah.
that's the process of empowering. Like, I keep trying, and learning from that mistake, right? Using it as a
Mm-hmm.
learning curve of saying, I went left, but that didn't work out so well. Let me try going right and see if that works out a
Mm-hmm.
little bit better. And if right didn't work out, okay, maybe let me go straight or let me go backwards a little bit and make some adjustments. So it gives you information so that you can make adjustments to make a better choice next time because there is no manual to do this stuff. If
Not
there
a
is,
one, right?
there, so you're navigating and figuring it out as you go. And so I think taking a step back, having my own son, like having compassion for him taught me to have self-compassion for myself as well because
Mm-hmm.
he's learning and like I can't be hard on him because he's navigating life through touching and absorbing things and um
Mm-hmm.
discovering new things, and it might be dangerous things, and I'm like, "Oh my god, you shouldn't do that." Well, maybe I shouldn't have had
Mm-hmm.
it out. Let me let me not blame
Right.
him. Maybe I need to do a better job. I made a mistake, so and don't beat myself up either for making that mistake for leaving out X, Y, and Z. I'm
Right.
like, all right, I got to do a little bit better job of putting things away or keeping him out of that space, and because he's going to do what he's going to do, it's part of that
Mm-hmm.
self compassion part, right? So that's a small piece, but it builds upon each other, right? If we can have compassion
Yes.
for our loved ones or someone that did us wrong, right? That helps us even in that trauma process. A lot of times people
Mm-hmm.
are like, I can't forgive them.
Yep.
Okay, well,
Mm-hmm.
it's your choice not to forgive them. But how is that helping you? How's that serving you,
Mm-hmm.
holding on to that pain of something that, yes, they did you wrong, granted, right? So you have to give yourself self-compassion and say, you know what, it's not my fault that this was done to me, but I'm choosing to do X, Y, and Z to move forward. So it can be
Mm-hmm.
very multifaceted in just practicing this one component of healing and being your own cheerleader rather than your own critic. Now we
Right.
know we know how to do that
Mm-hmm.
really well. We know how to criticize ourselves
Yes.
so well. but really
Mhm.
struggle to cheerlead and coach ourselves and, you know, boost ourselves up as human beings. I always ask why. And personal people always say, well, that's what we learn, right? When we grew up, that's what we learned.
Mhm.
Don't do this. Don't do that. If you do this, you're gonna become this. Blah 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 blah. Right? Every negative was it every four negative. It takes four positive to erase one negative. So if we're
Mhm.
constantly bombarded by negative things, that's gonna become our
Yeah.
narrative. That's
Mhm.
gonna become how we
Absolutely.
communicate to ourselves, to others, so forth and so on. So I think it's really important to be our own cheerleader and do that. So I wonder, what would you name or what would you consider some misconceptions or some barriers that gets in the way of us being able to practice self compassion? And how can we kind of address that, even if we do some assessment of ourselves? How can we address
Mhm. Yeah. Absolutely. I would say one big one is I always think about we all live within the society that we're in, right? And that contributes a lot to how we see things. And I would say in general, we live in a society that is big on like shame and blame, right? Like we want to know whose fault it is.
that?
And that comes up a lot. There's a there was years ago I was working at this community mental health clinic, and I worked as an intake coordinator. And if the front desk was having issues, I would go and assist or whatever, and like cover for them periodically. And I remember someone had made a mistake on the psychiatrist's calendar, and there were three people up at the front trying to figure out who made the mistake. They were probably talking about this 15 minutes. It would have taken 1 minute to fix the mistake and to move on with life, right? But we like to know who to blame, right? Like we like to know who to blame. And so, one big barrier for self compassion is people are like, well, I don't just want to let myself off the hook, right? And it's like, we don't, I mean, you did it. Right, or you made a mistake. What are you holding on to? And I think that is truly a byproduct of the society that we live in. um I think another barrier is people are really afraid of falling into this like self pity party, right? They're just kind of like, they don't want to get to that point. They don't want to be too kind to themselves, right? They are afraid that that's going to lead to not having any accountability. And it's like multiple things can be true. And I think that also is a product of our society, right? Like, how much have we heard about tough love? Well,
Mhm.
don't hold a baby too much, right? We're always like, we got to be real cautious and real limiting when it comes into things that feel kind, because we're always afraid that we're going to mess something up. And so I think that
Yes.
those are barriers. I also think that a key component of self compassion that people don't realize is acknowledgement of the distress that you're feeling. Well, if I avoid my emotions, not offering myself self compassion supports that avoidance, right? Because in order for me to offer myself self compassion, I have to be able to acknowledge that something is not okay. And so, that in and of itself, depending upon that person's level of connection with self, can be a barrier. And so, I think it's also for some folks, it's new. If they grew up in a home that where there was a lot of criticism, where there was a lot of verbal abuse, it's uncertain. It feels unfamiliar. We talked a little bit about doing attachment work. Well, what if I'm like dismissive avoidant? That feels real uncomfortable to offer myself compassion. That feels overwhelming to me. And so it's much easier to do what I know and what's comfortable is to keep that distance and to be harsh and to be critical.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you spoke about what came to mind is that we have to create this hard shell, right? We have to walk around in this
Mhm.
hard shell and like be strong, right? And,
Right.
gotta be a strong black woman. I gotta be a strong black girl.
Yes.
I gotta be strong all together because the
And I
world is
gotta
hard.
keep it moving. I don't
You
have
gotta,
time for that. Mhm.
yeah, like, well, okay, and That's not working out too well for you because here you are
Right.
struggling with life because you've been having to just have this hard shell, and the hard shell is cracking. There's cracks in the shell. So
Yeah.
obviously
Mhm.
the shell's not working. So we got to revamp and figure out a different way, right? And you talked about like being kind, and this idea of being kind to ourselves is foreign, right? Because we're taught, we're not. We got to just keep pushing, keep doing, keep striving. The world's not going to give you
Mhm.
nothing. The world's not going to. So you just kind of, what is it? It's not even a like I'm getting an image. Like it's not even a shell. It's like
It's
what's
like
that pop?
armor. That's what I
Yeah,
think of. It
yeah.
becomes
But
this
around the
armor.
arm is the popping, the bubble wrap,
Oh, the plastic, the like
the
packing
plastic around it,
stuff.
right? So you
Yeah.
have
Mhm.
but you have plastic right, and anybody that push your button or do you start popping off because you're irritable because you're trying to stuff everything in. So
Yes.
it's counterproductive, right? You're trying to
Mhm.
be hard and tough but you're also being irritable and agitated and easily provoked. And like anytime somebody pop your bubble, you're just like, why are you doing this? Because you haven't taken some time to deal with yourself. You're just
Yeah.
reactive than be proactive and deal with what you're feeling before you go out into the world and spill all your stuff all over the place. That's a whole nother conversation. But that's
Yes.
what came to mind for me.
Mhm.
It's a byproduct of the society and how we're taught to coexist with one another.
Mhm.
Um and there's not enough compassion in the world. There's not enough kindness in the world. Um because we're not doing it for ourselves. If we're doing it for ourselves, then it will spread out to other people because then it gives us ability to be empathetic and really be able to say, that person, I'm having a hard time. And I recognize that person must be having a hard time too. So let us
Mhm.
be able to communicate effectively, which is,
Mhm.
impossible because I'm recognizing, I'm owning like, I see myself in that person. That person must see themselves in me. And we are recognizing we can come together and say, wow, we're having a hard time today. Let us take a
Yeah.
break or
Hopefully we can see that, right?
right.
Cuz we
That's
know
the hope, right? In
the
perfect
whole
society.
yes. And I would just add to that, I think one of the challenges is if we add in race, right? Black women are also held to these higher standards by the people around them. They are expected to always be on. They're expected to be able to handle whatever is thrown at them. They are expected to hold it together, right? No matter how difficult things get. And so there are the external pressures and the internal pressures. And it's really hard to navigate. You think about the corporate world, there have been so many stories that have come out around Black women saying, like, I don't get to be an introvert. People want me to be on. People want me to be happy and bubbly. You don't really get to have a bad day at work. And that's something that is allotted to other races that a lot of Black women don't get to experience. You walk in and you're quiet, and people are like, well, what's wrong with you? Why she have an attitude today? Right. And so, like, it is a, I would say, it's even more challenging because you're getting this externally, and then internally it's hard because it makes a lot of people question themselves, right? Well, was I wrong for not speaking or being bubbly? Was I wrong for just wanting to go sit and have a moment to myself? And when people get in front of me, I'm very direct. I'm like, no, you're not wrong. You get to have a bad day. And it's really unfortunate that we live in a world that does not want to allow us that, and we get to take it, right? Now, that's a
Absolutely.
challenge because there could be consequences with that. And so I will have those conversations with people. But this work, and part of why I often just really tell my clients over and over and over, how are you going to celebrate yourself? And people feel like, well, that isn't really a big win. I said, it's because
Mhm.
you're used to winning, right? A lot of folks I work with are used to winning. They're used to being the top. They're used to being successful because they push themselves. And so I am big on how you're going to celebrate this. That's one of the number one forms of homework that I assign to people. Okay, well, what are you going to do? And I am big on, I'm writing it down. Let's add a little pressure, and I'm going to ask you about it the next time we meet. And I think that that is imperative because we do not live in a world that specifically if you are black, if you're brown, or if you're part of the global majority, you do not get that grace. And so we have to be even more intentional and forceful in offering it to ourselves.
Absolutely, absolutely, abso-freaking-lutely.
Right? It's hard.
It's
So
hard, and I think
yeah.
even adding a part like I'm a Black Hispanic, first generation born American, and there's so
Yes,
much
the
pressure.
layers.
Yeah, it's so much pressure because you know you're the first one to go get your master's. You're the first one to do this. You're the first
Yes.
one to have. You're the first one. Blah 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 blah. And it's like, okay, I'm on. I'm on. I'm on. And you know, I think there's definitely a component to that that is not taken. It's taken lightly. You know, being you have to be the super mom because if not, God forbid, they're gonna think society gonna look at you. You know, I'm a little black boy.
Yeah.
You showing up, it's just so much thing. And
Listen,
so
yes.
taking a moment just to be like, I did the best I could today. Like, I'm like, I think I did the best. And I'm like, no, I did the best that I could today with what was given to me. And just having that
Hmm.
mantra, right, having that ability to process just your day and take it in and just own that life is hard and life is harder maybe because of your race, maybe because of your financial status, whatever it is,
Hmm.
there are layers and
Hmm.
layers that other people don't have to deal with or don't acknowledge that other people are dealing with. So it makes it a more challenging. So I'm glad you brought that to the forefront. Because yeah, I could have talked about it, but I was like, hey, that before, like it's a thing that I've had to own. I had to sit with, and I had to
Hmm.
kind of acknowledge for even the generations before me, trying to make sure that I had all that I have. Like I have to own, I got to
Hmm.
give it back to them because they sacrificed so much for me to have this great American life that I
Yeah.
have.
The amount of pressure is it's ridiculous, honest. And it comes from all levels, like you say, you add in parenting, the shame that we do of mothers, right? And are you doing it right? Are you doing enough? All of those things. And not that we don't need to have an awareness or have concern or, parent with intention, but some of the pressures are just unwarranted. And so I think that being able to have compassion is really acknowledging that I'm not going to get it right all the time and I don't have to
Right.
because no one does, right?
Yeah.
Like the expectations for myself must be realistic because a lot of times people set themselves up for failure. They have these expectations that are not attainable or achievable, and then they can't meet them for a multitude of reasons, and then they're beating themselves up. And so I think one, having realistic expectations. I think there's a lot of fear that comes into play. There's a lot of people pleasing that comes into play. There's a lot of perfectionist tendencies that come into play. And a lot of it is truly surrounding avoidance of who we really are, right? And
Yeah.
the fact that it's not going to always be perfect. And there are a couple of quotes that I have had throughout my life that has been super helpful for me. One, I was doing an internship at a foster care agency, and my supervisor at the time had her own child who was going through some medical things, and she just was stressed. And I just remember her sharing a story of how she would just tell herself, like, okay, I'm doing the best that I can, and I can do better, right? And I just really love that. Um, and the other quote that I have, and I actually had this one up where I could see it for a very long time, for years, up until I moved, is by a Black woman who was the founder of Curlbox, Miley Teal. And she would say that failure is an event, it is not who you are. And I think we have to understand that sometimes a mistake is a mistake,
Right.
beginning, middle, end, that's it. Right. And I know we love to say, well, what am I learning from it? Maybe I'm learning something. Maybe it was purely just a mistake and I'm moving on with my life.
Mm-hmm.
Because for the folks who I work with who are highly intellectual, right? They intellectualize everything. and
Mhm.
they will take on a challenge. That trying to learn from that mistake can send us somewhere we're not trying to go. So maybe I
Okay.
need to learn, maybe it was just a mistake. And do I need to learn from it right now, or do I just kind of let myself be upset and then like maybe go to sleep tonight and then tomorrow I can reflect? Because
Mhm.
again, that pressure is so familiar that it can become another form that leads to, well, I should have known better,
Hmm.
right? And it gets
Yeah,
tricky.
yeah, I never thought about it that way, and that's a different way to conceptualize. Because I always ask the question, but I try to change and say, "What did you learn about
Hmm.
yourself from this experience?"
Yes.
Right? What did
Hmm.
you learn about yourself? And sometimes, like I can overcome things, or I can, I can I can make a mistake and move on. Right? And
Hmm.
so, kind of reflecting more about yourself and less about the mistake because for me what I my experience has been every mistake or every challenge, as my dad would say, it's not it's not a frustration, it's a challenge. Every challenge that you will encounter, what are you learning about yourself? That I can deal with challenges, or I am able to deal with this, and really reflecting on
Hmm.
you as a person rather than the issue or the thing in front of you, because there's going to be a lot of those, but you're the person that's going to continue to navigate those. So that's why I usually use it for
Hmm.
about. I understand what you're saying. And I think that's a different concept, and being wary of asking, what did you learn from this, and not figuring out language. Language is important. Language is power, and you can
Yes.
say the same thing with a different intent and get a different answer. So
Right. Yeah. And
yeah,
depending on where a person is on their journey, right? Because you could probably ask yourself that question and come up with a quick answer and you go on with life, right? But for somebody who's at maybe step one, that
yeah,
can lead to, well, I made this mistake. Well, you know what? 2 weeks ago, that reminds me of a time. It can lead to a spiral. And so I'm not saying that we don't acknowledge that we learn a lot from mistakes. I know I surely do. But I also know there have been times where I made a mistake and really I was just tired, right? Like I was
right.
I was exhausted. I had some brain fog, right? And I think about some of the young moms who I work with. They're sleep deprived. Maybe there's a lesson. Maybe they just weren't well rested, and so they made a mistake. And
Mhm.
then when they get some rest, the chances of them making that mistake is probably greatly lessened. And so I am big on reflection. And I think that there are things where definitely, there have been a lot of times where I'm like, you know what, I actually messed that up because I overextended myself. And then the lesson for that is how can I recognize when I'm at capacity? Um, and then there are times where I reflect and it's like, it was a mistake. That was,
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
that was it. And then just move on from there.
Absolutely. Wow, I've learned a lot, and you've allowed me to reflect on a lot and challenge myself to be a little bit more self-compassionate and remembering not to be an overachiever. If you had any key takeaways that you want to leave with the audience today, what would that be for them today?
Ooh, I would say um, allow yourself to celebrate yourself. I think that's a big one. The other thing is, and we really didn't talk about this, but so much of us not having compassion for ourselves shows in how we talk to ourselves. And our longest relationships will be with ourselves, right? We're going to hear our own voice more than anyone else's. And so do you really like being around someone who talks negatively to you? Do you really like being around someone who calls you names? Do you really like being around someone who doesn't offer you grace? And if the answer to those things are no, then we have to remember that we are also, in a very real way, someone in our lives who the things that we're saying are often reinforcing some of those negative core beliefs that were planted a long time ago, which actually prohibits us from seeing ourselves in a different light. There's so much talk about worth. Well, if every time I make a mistake, I'm calling myself an idiot, how am I going to believe that I'm worthy of achieving things? How am I going to believe that the things that I desire are actually
Mhm.
within reach. And so, um, being really mindful of how we speak to ourselves, I think is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. That takes the cake. I like how you put that. Do you want to hang out with someone that always talks
Right, because
negative?
we'll be like, I ain't going around her again. All she do is spew
Mhm.
negativity. And then we do it with ourselves and then wonder why we feel how we feel.
Yeah, absolutely. That's powerful. Thank you, Siobhan, so much for joining me today on this discussion. How can my listeners, if they want to learn more about your work and what you're doing, where can they find you or connect with you online?
Yeah, so I have an Instagram account. I have two. One of them I'm not that active on. So if you really want to see like what I'm talking about, you can find me at Sincerely Siobhan on Instagram. It has the link to my website. It has all of the things that I am doing there, and that would be the best way.
Okay, absolutely. Thank you so much for joining. Those that have been listening here are Getting Rooted. Remember to take care of yourself. If you want to elevate your mindset, my workbook is out now on Amazon. It's a 40-day journey of words of affirmation that you can go on a journey of healing and shifting your mindset to elevate you to another level and give yourself self compassion, not beat yourself up, all the stuff. You can find that on Amazon or on my website, gettingrooted.com, getting-rooted.com. Excuse me. You can follow me on Instagram at getting_rooted, ROOTED. There's dots in between the letters. Or Facebook at Getting Rooted 23. Make sure that you stay connected, join the conversation. And until next time, make sure to stay rooted, reclaiming one's own truth, and embracing destiny. Be well. Bye.